Okay, I think we're going to get started so that we maximize the time. So welcome to the Meet the Experts NIH funding panel. The goal of the panel is to pass on expert advice about grant writing from successful NIH investigators who've been successful in getting their research funded. And just quick introductions. I'm Zeynep Erim. I'm a program director at the NIBIB. I have my colleague Michelle Burney-Lang from NCI. Then we have Dr. Bruce Stromberg, who's the IC director at NIBIB. And he pretty much represents, he's sitting in a good place because he's the transition between NIH to NIH-funded researchers, as he just recently became an NIH employee from being an NIH-funded investigator. Then we have David Cormode, who's representing the more junior investigator on the panel, who I believe is more close in age and stage to most of you here. But nevertheless, he's already got several NIH grants under his belt. And then we have another senior investigator at the end of the table who, as luck would have it, had her other session, other talks scheduled right at the same time, but she's going to be running in here about 2 o'clock. So the way we're going to run this panel is I'm going to start with a brief introduction into NIH and NIBIB and talk about some funding opportunities. Then Michelle is going to talk about corresponding opportunities at NCI, give you some resources, and finish off with some tips. And then we're going to pass the ball to the investigators and talk about their history of getting funded and hear about their advice and tips for you in terms of how to become successfully funded. So I'm Zeynep Erim. I'm the acting director of the Division of Training at the NIBIB. And this slide, I want to show that for anybody at the NIH, if you know their name, you know their email. So their first name dot their last name at nih.gov will get you to anybody at the NIH, unless they have a very unusually common name. Actually, I don't know what happens in that case, but I'm sure they figured something out. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the NIH. So NIH is the largest funding agency in the world. Its mission is the largest funding agency devoted to health research. And its mission is to understand the nature and behavior of living systems and to apply this knowledge to improve human health. As you can see from here, NIH is made up of 27 different ICs, which stands for institutes and centers. And each IC has a separate mission, and it's in your best interest to find out what the mission of each IC that is kind of close to your work, because when your application gets assigned to an IC for funding consideration, you want to make sure that you have understood the mission of that IC and you have made, well, actually, both the mission of the IC and the programs that they support. So you have prepared the right application for the right funding mechanism and for the appropriate mission of the IC. So another point I want to make at this slide is that, as you can see, each IC has a different budget, and as you can see, the budgets vary quite differently, quite widely. So I'm with the NIBIB, and the biggest news at NIBIB is that since January, we have a new IC director. Actually, as luck has it, we have our previous IC director in the room, although I can't see him right now. Oh, sitting right there, Dr. Roderick Pettigrew. And while I'm at it, I want to acknowledge two other colleagues, Dr. David George and Manana Sukareva. And they are, I'm sure, happy to answer questions also, especially after the session, after the question and answers. So Bruce comes to us from UC Irvine, where he was a professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and Surgery, and he was also the director of the Beckman Laser Institute and Medical Clinic. So at NIBIB, we're rethinking our programs and doing our strategic planning based on Bruce's vision of engineering the future of health, but our commitment to technology and innovation remains unchanged, and we express our mission as transforming through the understanding of disease and its prevention, detection, diagnosis, and treatment. NIBIB operates at the interface of physical sciences, life sciences, and engineering. The projects that we fund are new technologies that are in the early stages, that are enabling tools and approaches, and NIBIB does not have a disease or tissue or organ focus. NIBIB catalyzes innovation across the NIH and beyond. It's quite possible to arrange our programs in various different ways. I stole this slide from Bruce. So he's grouping therapeutic devices, engineered biology, sensors and point-of-care technologies, imaging technologies, and in the middle of them all is modeling and machine intelligence and bioinformatics. So on the bottom, we have things we do to make measurements from the system, monitor it, for diagnostic purposes, and on the top there are things that we do to the system to manipulate it to affect desired outcomes. And in the middle of it all, interacting with everything is modeling and bioinformatics, which kind of makes sense of it all. If you wanted to see more of our scientific program areas, you could go to our website, NIBIB. Oh, the clicker just died on me. Okay, nibib.nih.gov, and if you go under the research funding, you will see our programs structured just a little bit differently into bioimaging, bioengineering, and informatics sections, and there's also the training section, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. So if you go under each of these divisions, you will see a brief description of the division, its goals, and then underneath it, there will be program areas that are described. And within each program area, you can go to find out who manages it, whom to contact, and what kind of emphasis the program has, and also examples of funded applications. Now I'm with the training division, and if you go under the training and careers, you will see pages where you can look for specific opportunities for you at different levels. You can specify your career stage and whether you're a person looking for funding at that level or you're somebody from an institution that wants to develop programs to support individuals in that level. So you can all specify that, and it will give you a list of all the possible opportunities that are available to you. So this is a slide that has all of the well, actually not all, but the more common funding opportunities that NIBIB supports, and these are all spread out through the career stages, starting from undergraduate all the way to senior investigators. And on the right-hand side is the activities which we call training activities, which includes some form of training, and those are the ones that my division supports. So I had the temptation to put slides on all of them, but I don't really want to take all of the time here, because what we really want to do in this panel is keep things very kind of informal and interactive. So I'm trying to keep my section to like 10 minutes and then pass it on, and then we will go to the more interactive section. So I'm going to highlight only a few of the programs that we have. Before I get to that, wanted to get an idea of who's in the room. So can we start with undergraduates? Are there undergraduate students in the room? Okay, 2. Doctoral students? Okay, a few. Postdocs? Junior investigators? All right. Any senior investigators? Okay, welcome. Okay, so I think I probably made a good choice I'm not going to talk about fellowships, but keep in mind that NIH does have fellowships at the predoctoral and postdoctoral level. So if you have any questions about that, ask them during the Q&A, and also we can talk about them afterwards. So I want to focus on the Career Development Awards, and these are awards that NIBIB and most of the other NIH ICs support to help junior investigators transition into research independence. At the NIBIB, we have 6 types of K awards. So for the PhDs, we have the Ko8 and Ko1, which are closely related. They both require a career redirection to be proposed in the application. The Ko1 is the more general one. It doesn't have any boundaries on what your background is or which kind of new area you want to branch out to, as long as it's in the mission of the NIBIB, of course. The K25 has the specific requirement that the new area be of biomedical in nature, and that your background be quantitative scientists like physics, computer engineering, or computer science, or any engineering that is not biomedical engineering and has not given you the biomedical experiences that you may need to bring your background into the areas that are relevant to the NIH. Then for the MDs, we have the Ko8 and K23 programs, which are quite similar, and they're both geared towards physician-scientist training. The only difference between them is that Ko8 is more lab-focused work, whereas the K23 is patient-oriented work. Then for both PhDs and MDs, we have a hybrid award called the K99R00. It is a 2-phase program that provides up to 2 years of funding at the postdoctoral level while the postdoc is finishing up their training, getting the final skills that they require to become an independent investigator, and also looking for a faculty position. And once they find a faculty position, they're able to transition into the R00 phase. And in this phase, the support is for 3 years, and at the larger level than is allowed for the K99. We have a new program called the Mosaic K99, and this is the same as the regular K99, but also has the focus on promoting diversity in the workforce. The K99 is our most popular award, so we do get a lot of applications for that, and very strong applications. But what I want to bring to your attention is that we are not getting enough K01, K25, Ko8, and K23 applications. So this is really a good time for you to be applying to make use of the funds that are available. So of course, we want strong applications, but there is really a need for the applications coming. I want to highlight the team-based design in biomedical engineering education, our 25 program, because this is a biomedical engineering forum, and I know there are many of you focused on biomedical engineering education in the room. So this is a program that has been out for 11 years, and I believe most of you know it, hopefully. But in this reissuance, what we wanted to do was focus on groundbreaking approaches that the institution proposes to implement, evaluate, and then disseminate. So what we're really looking for is the next phase of biomedical engineering education and ways to transform it. While we're on the matter of R25s and course development, I want to highlight this opportunity from the Blueprint for Neuroscience Research Program. So this is an initiative that is focused on neuroscience, and there's a new call out for developing courses specifically for translational devices. And I also want to mention that we do have these slide sets that I'm not reading all of the information. This is just to give you a taste of what's out there so you can look in more detail. But we're happy to pass on to those that send us their email, the full deck with all the information with actually even more added programs. So I want to highlight our debut program, which is a design competition dedicated only for undergraduate students, so they're not competing with any more senior people. The challenge is held in conjunction with Venturewell, and we are offering a total of $80,000 in prizes. And the award ceremony actually is the next session in this room at 3:45 p.m., so don't leave your seats. I want to mention our diversity programs. So we have the diversity supplements, which are supplements that we make to existing NIH grants. These supplements can be to support candidates that are at any stage of their careers. We have a diversity F31 for PhD students that the student can directly apply to us for. We have an esteemed program which is geared towards undergraduate students and recruiting them into STEM fields and retaining them there. Then we have the Mosaic K99, which I just mentioned. And then there are three topic-specific opportunities that NIBIB supports. So the top four opportunities, you're free to suggest whatever topic area you want to work in. There are no restrictions as long as they are relevant to the NIBIB. The bottom three, the blueprint is neuroscience focused, so the focus there should be on neuroscience. The Endure program is related to undergraduate students and recruiting them into neuroscience-related fields and increasing diversity. The F99K00 program, also called the D-SPAN, is for PhD students to help them transition into successful postdoc positions. Then we have the Brain K99 R00, which is the K99 program with a diversity focus and related to Brain Initiative, which is focused on neurotechnologies for understanding the brain. I want to quickly mention that NIH has a loan repayment program that is focused on paying the educational debt that you may have. And I'm not going to go into the details. You can look at the slides later. But what I want to highlight is that there's been a change from the past years, this year we're starting to provide $50,000 as opposed to the $35,000 that used to be the case. And this is for 2 years, so for each of the 2 years you can get $50,000 of your student loan debt paid off, and it's also renewable. If there's still remaining debt and if you're still qualifying, you can come back to pay off the rest. So the programs that I spoke about up till now were programs that had a focus on training. But if you're at a point where you don't need any more training and you just want to secure funding for your research, there are 3 major mechanisms that the NIH uses. The R01 is the most common one, and it's generally used as a sign of success and having arrived. It provides support for a well-described problem and a research project based on that. It requires preliminary data. It is generally 3 to 5 years long, renewable, and the budget is typically $250,000 to $499,000 per year. NIBIB funds these for 4 years. Then we have the R03, which is a small program that is for self-contained data analysis, pilots, methods development, and it provides $50,000 per year for 2 years. And then we have the R21 Exploratory Developmental grant. The ideal case is for high-risk, high-reward applications. And no preliminary data is requested in these applications. It provides $275,000 over 2 years, and they're supposed to be used for the exploratory developmental program, and they're not really kind of a starter, small version of a mini R01 in general. So the R03 and R21 are not supported by all of the ICs. So again, it's in your best interest to, once you have an idea, contact the program director, make sure you understand which IC it is most appropriate to, because whatever you believe is going to be assigned to the IC that NIH thinks is the most appropriate for. And if you have prepared an application, say an R03 for an institute that does not support the R03, your application is just going to be probably returned to you. So the NIBIB supports a special version of the R21 program. This is for exploratory, developmental, and high-risk, high-reward programs. And no preliminary data is allowed in these applications. And again, it's $275,000 over 2 years. And we also have a Trailblazer R21, which is a modified R21, only for new and early stage investigators. And new investigator is somebody who has not had enough NIH support so far, or not substantial NIH support so far. And early stage investigator is a new investigator who also happens to be within 10 years of their PhD. This provides $400,000 over 3 years. No preliminary data is required. And even if you want to provide preliminary data, there's a limit on it. You are allowed only minimal preliminary data, which we define as half a page, only 1 figure of unpublished data is allowed. If you have published data of your own that you want to discuss, that is fine. That is just a regular reference. In addition to these opportunities, each IC will have notices of special interest to direct your attention to certain areas. This is an example of some notices of special interest that we have out there. The first 4 are ones that arose from a workshop on extending the technologies to extend the golden hour, and they're related to trauma care. And then we have on the bottom a opportunity for small businesses and the adoption of FHIR standards for interoperability in healthcare informatics. In addition to these, there are generally many initiatives going on at the NIH, at the whole NIH level. And we have the BRAIN initiative right now and the SPARK initiative, which I believe is of interest to most of you. The BRAIN initiative is focused on neurotechnologies for understanding the brain. And the SPARK is more focused on the peripheral nervous system and neuromodulation to relieve conditions. But I want to highlight this HEAL effort for a second. It's focused on the opioid crisis, and it supports improving prevention and treatment strategies for opioid misuse and addiction, and enhancing pain management is part of that. And NIBIB is playing a major role in this initiative, and we have several opportunities available right now on developing medical devices for pain management. And Michael Wolfson is the program director that you can contact to get more information about these. And I want to end by mentioning that NIBIB is a IC that is completely devoted to bioengineering and bioimaging, but it's not the only IC that supports NIH funding. As a matter of fact, I actually need to correct the slide now. 6 institutes are spending more funds in 2018 than NIBIB. And the top 11 institutes have spent in FY 2018 $3.6 billion, which amounts to 10% of NIH's budget. So there are opportunities for you in other ICs as well. And as you can see, NCI is at the top of the pack here, and now we will hear about opportunities at the NCI.
Thank you. It's great to be back at BMES. My background is in biomedical engineering applied to hematology, and so it's really a pleasure to be here at this meeting, giving the perspective from the NIH. I'm Michelle Burney-Lang, and I serve as a program director in the NCI's Center for Strategic Scientific Initiatives. And you'll see that email trick works. Even if you have a complicated last name with a hyphen, it's still going to get you to me. So I'm going to start off and continue the trend with talking about some funding opportunities. These are certainly not exhaustive to NCI. These are just some highlights that I wanted to put on the screen. And then I'll go through some tips that may help you towards success when you're looking to apply for these. So as Zainab mentioned, NCI does support a large amount of technology and bioengineering opportunities. These range from early scale technology development through the Innovative Molecular Analysis Technologies Program. This should have new opportunities coming up in the spring of this year. And I do want to point out, for each of these people that I put on the screen, I'll continue to tell this message throughout. These are their program directors, these are the point people, these are people to get to know, to share your ideas with, to talk about and talk with if you're going to consider applying to these opportunities. So we have this technology development program. We also have a program focused on tissue engineering for cancer purposes, projects in physical sciences and oncology, and all these are good ways to get you into NCI. A couple other snapshots, and if you have questions on any of these, I'm happy to talk through more. I'll just, in the interest of time, put them up on the screen and allow you to dig into them a little bit more deeply. There are also opportunities in systems biology for cancer, And then a large number of opportunities in informatics that range from the very early stage development to really the development, validation, and hardening of these informatics technologies. And then I saw our audience was kind of a mixed bag with some people earlier in their careers. So we do have a variety of training programs. One that I want to point out because I'm involved with is a postdoctoral fellowship that we have together with the Department of Veterans Affairs to have data scientists come in and work with their health records data. And then through the NCI Center for Cancer Training, we have a broad variety of funding opportunities, and this is very much in parallel to from what was mentioned earlier, from the very early pre-doctoral stages all the way to some of these career transition and career development awards. And for each of these, there is a relevant program director at NCI that can give you advice and guidance if you're thinking about applying and helping you understand the best fit. One other nice thing about some of these funding opportunities is that they do have some healthy success rates at a time when some of our success rates are going down. There have been a lot of success with people getting some of these early training and early career development awards through the NCI. And this slide looks very similar to what we saw before, but I wanted to use it to point out that it's not only money, but there are a ton of projects being supported in bioengineering at at NIH. Over 10,000, almost 11,000 projects that fit this terminology. So every single institute and center that funds research has a piece of this bioengineering pie. And really, no matter what your research is, if it has some kind of biomedical application, it's very likely going to fit one of these institutes and centers. So this is just a word map of the new projects that have been funded, and you can see they cover a broad range of topics from computational models to single cell approaches. If you look deeper into the high throughput approaches, they range from animal models to computational models to brain tools for the brain. So NCI, or oh my goodness, I keep on saying NCI. NIH as a whole is really supporting a large amount of bioengineering research, and we really encourage you to consider applying and consider seeing how your research might fit with us. So knowing that you're welcome to apply, what are some tips if you would like to choose to do so? We had a fellow in our center last year who came in as a AAAS fellow, and he said, wow, I have this opportunity to go behind the scenes at NIH, and he really wanted to use that time to learn what he could to then share with his colleagues that were investigators and try to give them some behind the scenes tips on how they might be successful. So he spent his time doing this. This is developed into a new investigator handout that I'm happy to provide you if you want to send me an email. But just snapshots of what he said, and I'll go through more. With all of these funding opportunities that we've mentioned, if you find one of interest, definitely read it in depth. There are a lot of specific features that you want to key in on, and if you don't hit some of those features, it may not go on to review. So it really behooves you to know very well what the funding opportunity is asking for. There are a variety of NIH tools that I'll talk through more that can help you identify program officers, help you identify study sections, and this highlighted term, and I'll keep on saying this throughout, is to talk to us, to talk to the program officers. We're coming from research backgrounds. We love to hear about your science, and we are here to help you through the NIH, from your idea process to your application process to what to do after you get your reviews back. So I really encourage you at an early time, months before you submit your application, to start engaging with a program officer and to keep doing that throughout the process. If you do get a chance to serve as reviewer, that's a wonderful way to learn about NIH, and I encourage you to try to apply and consider this. I'll have more information about how to put your information out there to be considered as a reviewer. And then one last tip, we have a lot of workshops and roundtables to help us identify emerging areas and help us identify what could be valuable to the field. And if you do get asked to share your expertise, I really recommend it. It's a great way to interact with NIHers, to interact with other experts in the field. It can feel like a burden to add that to your to-do list, but it really is a good opportunity. So going through these in a bit more detail, they can help you navigate this complicated pipeline of the early career to the established investigator funding opportunities. There's really so many of them. If you want to take a peek and see what's out there, there's the grants.nih.gov website, which is a wonderful tool for giving you more information about funding, about how to apply for funding, and it's a good resource just to understand what is going on out there. You can also sign up to receive a listing of new funding opportunities that can come right to your email address. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but it can really help you keep up and see what's going on across the NIH. In terms of funding opportunities, I wanted to give you a bit of background about the types of these, because this will come up when you see them. There's essentially 3 main types. We talked about the investigator-initiated R01 awards. So those fall into that parent announcement category. So this is you submitting your best idea. These are going to go to study sections, and they'll go by the pay line of the institute in terms of funding. We also have some that are a little bit more tailored with a little bit more guidance on what there is of interest through these program announcements with a special receipt date and program announcements with a set aside. So this will give you a broad idea of what an institute is looking for. And as we heard about earlier, they're changing this process up a little bit. So you'll start seeing more and more of these notices of special interest, where an institute and center will call out an area of interest. And then with those, if you see them, then you can apply back to the parent announcement to address some of those areas of special interest. And then the most prescribed funding opportunities are these requests for applications, where we've identified a well-defined scientific area. We have set aside money to support that area, and you can come in and apply for this in a really much more defined scope. So it's helpful to know those parameters when you're looking at funding opportunities that can range from your best idea that fits the mission of NIH to things that are targeted to hit a few more special areas of particular NIH interest. So getting back to the program officers, you come across a funding opportunity and you're interested in applying for it. It's really a great idea to work with these individuals. The program officers come by a huge variety of names that make us very confusing. So program directors to program managers to scientific research contacts on funding opportunity announcements to health scientist administrators. Those are all the same people, all here to help you along your way. We're coming to the NIH almost always with a PhD in a certain scientific area. And a lot of our goal there is to develop new areas of science and to help investigators through the process. So don't feel bad about contacting us, because it's really our job to help you. So please know that that door is open, and we want to be available to assist you through the NIH. If you look at the grant process overall, there are many different points where it's helpful to work with us. When you have your idea and are interested in seeing what might be the best fit, give us an email. We're happy to take a look at specific aims and see how those match to different opportunities. We can help you to match up with what study sections may be relevant, give you some feedback, and recommendations for data or other resources that you could consider. So developing that relationship can be really helpful for ensuring you're on the right track and aware of funding opportunities that might make sense for you. And this fits into the broader scheme, and I wanted to put this slide out because it's a little bit different than what happens at NIH, or what happens at NSF. At NIH, we have our program officials that I'm just mentioning, and we work in a team with the scientific review officers who lead the review of the applications. They lead that process, and then a team with the grants management officials who are the people who really sign off and ensure that you get the money for the grant. So it's all kind of a partnership to make this granting process happen. And if you want to find one of us, a great tool to use if you haven't already is the NIH Reporter. This, you can see everything that's been funded and read some of the abstracts of different projects that have been funded. In particular, if you're looking for a program officer, there's a matchmaker tool, and you can type in your specific aims, your project of interest, and that will spit out some information about what has been funded. You can see the institutes and centers that are funding that. You can see what types of awards are being made. and get these contacts for individuals that you can email and have a conversation about the research that you may like to perform. So this is a good first way to find someone who could be helpful for your NIH path. In addition to that, on Matchmaker, you can see what projects have been successful, so that can give you an idea of the scope of projects that are being funded, see if some of your competitors or potential collaborators are getting funded. So once you have talked to a program officer, you've developed your application, now you want to find the right study section to recommend for this. There's another tool that can be useful, the assisted referral tool. Very similar to the Matchmaker. If you put in information, like your specific aims, it'll actually spit out study sections that may be relevant and may be appropriate to the work that you're submitting. So this is a good way to get an idea of which study sections could be a potential fit. And then it'll give you more information about the study section itself and who the SRO is for that section. And that can come in later when you're thinking about being a reviewer. This could be someone helpful to contact in the future. So with a reviewer, I think a lot of our investigators have commented that this is a wonderful way to learn how NIH works, to learn what reviewers are thinking about when they view applications, to see how they consider bioengineering approaches in the applications. And so we encourage you to try to become a reviewer and accept those opportunities to serve as a reviewer. I know it can sometimes be a little bit hard to get into the system, but there are ways to apply for the Early Career Reviewer Program to get engaged. And the Center for Scientific Review also has a lot of resources online for you to watch mock panels or get an idea of what happens during a study section that can be really helpful for your future. And one last point that I wanted to make, because we do have a lot of early stage investigators here. We talked about this just a second ago, but the ability to be an early stage investigator, someone that's 10 years or less from their terminal degree, can be a really good benefit, as you're starting out. At the NCI right now, if you apply for an R01, the pay line is something around 8%. But that bumps it up to about 14% if you're coming with an early stage investigator criteria. So this is a really valuable thing that you have, and I just advise you to be mindful of which applications that you use this on when you're looking to apply to an R01, or if you are going to apply to a multi-PI grant, just be mindful of how you may lose that status when you get one of these big awards. And this fits with NIH's push to really encourage more early stage investigators into their pipelines. So just a quick summary, do your due diligence in learning about the funding opportunities and the specific features of them. Use these NIH tools, talk to program officers. I hope you found we're both approachable and happy to answer questions. And if you have an opportunity, definitely participate in review. And if you would like more information on these that has been kind of collated into a guide, I'd be happy to provide that, and if you send me an email. So with that, I will let us go on to our next set of speakers, but I'll be here for questions throughout the session.
Okay, so Gordana, welcome.
Thank you. I must apologize. I'm not rude. I was scheduled to speak 1:30 to 2. They double booked, so I'm very sorry.
Can you hold the mic?
Yeah,
I guess
sure.
they're taping. It's on. It's on.
Okay. I just apologize because for being late. It's okay.
We appreciate your
Sure.
late session. So if you've caught your breath, do you want to do ladies first and start?
I think
So-
Bruce can start.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thanks, Gordana. So I'll keep this brief. Thank you so much. It's really fantastic, Zainab, that you're organizing this, and Michelle, the time that you take. I think this is a really good example of the commitment and the passion that program directors have for our community, our broad community of researchers. Now, I can say NCI invests 10% of their budget in bioengineering. You guys have all learned this. So we know they're the wealthiest of all the institutes, and so they know where to invest. It's a really good sign. So as Zainab mentioned, I'm the director of the NIBIB, and I just started 10 months ago. So I'm giving you a little bit of a perspective of having been in academics for 30 years. I arrived at UC Irvine in 1988 and left in January 2019. So that's a long time. In that period, I had various centers funded. You know, we all have these types of grants, the R's, the U's, the P's, the K's, the T's. It can really drive you crazy, make you very confused. So I've done all those, and many activities that are very closely aligned and related to what all of you are doing and hope to do over the course of your careers. When I first arrived, of course, there was no Department of Biomedical Engineering, and we had probably fewer than, I don't know, 20 biomedical engineering departments in the entire country. It's been one of the most spectacular areas of growth. We now have at least 130, I think 119 that are ABET certified. Several don't really care that much about ABET certification, so that's fine. And you know, there's diversity in our departments just in terms of that. That growth continues to happen. So we're seeing 1,500 to 1,600 new undergraduates per year all across the country going into biomedical engineering. And if you do stay for the debut award ceremony, we're giving out $80,000 in awards. We'll probably be doing more next year, we hope. And we'd like to see every department have debut entries. It's an amazing program, and it's kind of the secret weapon of our field. Undergraduates really come in and they get hooked on many of these problems and start thinking about them and working on them. I think many of you probably, as assistant professors, are working on things that you thought of and you were inspired when you did your senior design projects, or some ideas came to you in classes and you're still working on those things. You'll probably be working on some aspect of those things for the next 20 to 30 years. My entry into biomedical engineering came through optics and photonics, and I was really lucky being in the right place at the right time. I got involved in lasers in the early 80s, and at the time, the reason to get involved in lasers is because they were very appealing, because only a few people could actually get them to work. And then if they did work, you could really crank the power up and blow things up. You know, they were really spectacular, very expensive. Most people were building their own. Now, I don't have the laser pointer with me that costs $2, but I think you can all imagine the $2 laser pointer. That was unimaginable when I first started working in the field of optics and photonics. It was equally unimaginable to have femtosecond lasers that you could press and turn on. People were hoping to get a picosecond back in those days. So I say this just to remind you that over the course of your careers, 20 to 30 years, the arc of technology, it's relentless, and it will allow you to do things that you really hadn't anticipated or imagined, and it's in every aspect of our field. So where does the NIH stand in all of this? So I came 10 months ago, and very enthusiastic about the role of biomedical engineering and bioimaging. We all know that this is the future of health, hence the tagline, engineering the future of health. It's really quite important that our vision, our community's vision of what we can do and how we can change health and health care throughout the world is widely disseminated through all institutes. So a good sign, NCI is a great sign. The biggest institute, and 10% of its budget is spent on bioengineering. And if you work the numbers out, this is overall for the NIH. About 12% of the NIH budget is spent on bioengineering, and this is just going to continue to grow. Now, NIBIB is a relatively small fraction of that, and to understand why we have a smaller fraction of the budget, you have to go back in history and see how NIBIB was actually created. It was not obvious within the fabric of the NIH to have an institute dedicated to engineering and physical science and computational methods in biology and medicine. In fact, the prevailing sentiment at the time was that this was not a good idea. The NIH director at the time was totally opposed to it. And I don't know if Rod is still here. Is Dr. Pettigrew still here? Okay. Well, the founding director, I mean, it was a very heavy lift for him to get this off the ground. And we're all very grateful for the work that he and all the colleagues of his in our community did in order to get the NIBIB launched. And the impact has just been unambiguous. Although we as a community are not necessarily all that great at telling everyone all the wonderful, essential, irreplaceable things that we do. So the fun part for me, as I come from academics, I've seen the creation and the growth of bioengineering. I've been part of that at my own former institution at UC Irvine. We became a program in 1998, a department in 2002. I think as many of you know, the UC system, all the schools have bioengineering. It's just been an enormous and powerful force. My career, anybody my age who's involved in this, we've all benefited tremendously from that enormous growth and the passion that we all have for this kind of work. And so this is my opportunity to reflect that back and hopefully put us as a community in a situation where we are better recognized, we're better resourced. We have so many incredibly talented students and faculty who need to get in the door and contribute their ideas. Of course, you can shop around. I mean, we have NSF, we have DOD, we have DOE, we have many other opportunities because fundamentally we're kind of technology driven, but we also move into important areas of biomedical application that allow us to go to the NCI or the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, neurologic disease and stroke and so forth. So we have application areas that are very, very important for us to show impact. So I guess the good news, and I'll sort of summarize, since I've been at the NIH, if I thought it was complicated when I was an extramural investigator, I've now come to the conclusion I didn't even know how complicated. I had no idea. It's insanely complex. It's a $40 billion agency. But the bottom line, they're really outstanding, committed, dedicated people. There is funding for all of you in there someplace. It's critical that you connect with those people, just like you connect with colleagues in your institutions and other institutions around the country, around the world. You align and resonate with ideas. There are people within the NIH that you will align with and resonate with. And you want to find and help them, you want to accept the fact that you need some help in navigating through that structure and that system. There are a lot of people that are excited and receptive to be able to do that. Under difficult economic times and pay lines drop, and maybe some of you caught the pay line from the NCI, which is 8th percentile. If you're not a junior investigator, then you get 5 additional points added to that. I can say that at NIBIB, our pay line this past year was 19th percentile. 5 additional points brings you up to 24th percentile for young investigators. But it's not just about getting the young investigators into the system. Young investigators become mid-career investigators. Mid-career investigators become senior investigators. So our ambition, our goal, is to try to raise the visibility of what we're doing. All of you are partners in this. It's not just a unidirectional operation, it's a bidirectional switch. As Michelle pointed out, get involved in review, get involved in committees, be active, express your voice. We, the NIBIB, is your institute. We came about as a result of the growth of bioengineering and imaging all around the country. And it's very, very important that all of you as stakeholders are as involved as possible, understand it as best as possible, and contribute with great ideas and, of course, great impactful research, which we like to highlight. Because my sort of job, in some sense, is to communicate this to our funders. Our funders are the American people, it's the public, it's Congress. And I can say from my experiences with Congress that there is enormous goodwill across all areas of Congress both in understanding and hoping that technology, the kind that we support, will have an increasingly important role in healthcare in very positive ways, in understanding disease and improving human health. So that's kind of my intro spiel. I think I'll pass it along, and I'm looking forward to taking questions and having a really good two-way discussion.
Thanks so much. I'm David Cormode from the University of Pennsylvania, Associate Professor in the Radiology Department and Secondary in the Bioengineering Department. So I was asked to give sort of a little bit of information on my experiences with the NIH and my top 3 tips for junior investigators. So I have received a K99R00 grant, which actually Dr. Erin was the program officer on. So thanks, and good to meet you in person. Also received a RO3, R41, which is a STTR grant, 3 R1s, and about 20 other grants from various other funders, be it sort of internal pilot grants, foundations, or industry. I'm currently a standing member of the IPCA study section, which is imaging probes and contrast agents. So if you work in that field, your proposal may be coming somewhere in my vicinity. I've served on another couple of study sections. I reviewed for the AHA, and for many countries, I review applications like France, United Kingdom, Germany, Sweden, countries like that. So some of my top 3 tips. If you think it feels bad to get your paper reviewed, it feels a lot worse getting your grant application, paper rejected, your grant application rejected. So you need to develop a thick skin, right? And what I'd say about like the score is a little bit like some kind of instrument that has a really wobbly needle. So like for the same thing it's reading, like the needle can be down one day and up the next day, right? So don't be too discouraged by a poor score, but also at the same time don't get too big of a head from getting a good score, because no one's winning streak lasts, right? In this era of funding rates, like you're gonna get applications rejected. But the thing is to be persistent, right? So like if you get your grant reviewed, maybe the scores aren't so good, but you have the opportunity to resubmit it, and especially with that feedback, you know what you need to do at that point, right? So definitely be persistent. I've always found it really helpful to work from examples through everything in my career. And really particularly, there are ways that the things that reviewers are looking for in grant applications that are not obvious from the instructions, right? So just one example is reviewers are often looking for alternatives and pitfalls section for each aim at the end. You have a section where you talk about like, okay, like this could go wrong, that could go wrong, what are we gonna do? Like perhaps proposing different conjugation strategies to link your antibody to your material, or something like that, right? And you might not know about that. So the NIH does post some examples online if you search around and look for them, or different universities post examples online that you can look at, or you can ask your mentors and colleagues for examples. In addition, like something which is kind of handy, we've already mentioned a couple of times NIH Reporter. If you go to NIH Reporter and search for your institution and search for the grant mechanism, right, so like K25 or whatever it is, you can pull up who in your institution has that grant, right? So those have been funded. So you can email a person and be like, hey, like I'm interested in applying for one of these grants. Can we meet for coffee and you discuss the proposal and what goes into it, whatever. And maybe at the end you say, would you mind sending me your proposal? They'll often send you your proposal, right? I mean, if you just email them cold, they might not do that. Another aspect is the innovation. So to get your grant funding, you need to be good on all the different components, but the innovation can be really helpful. I would say from being on the study section, like I'm not always bowled over by the innovation in proposals, right? So the way you can work this is look at the field as it is right now and think about what would be an advance on the field, right? So think about that, and then think what would be the advance you go to after that advance, right? So think like 2 steps ahead, right? And then you can hopefully come up with a pretty innovative proposal, or think about including additional innovative aspects, right? So let's put the case you come up with an innovative biomaterial or gel or nanoparticle or something like this. Okay, maybe make the payload innovative as well, right? So maybe there's been a new mechanism discovered in cancer and you found a drug that treats that or applies that new mechanism, or like you're using a new technique for assessing the microbiome or something like that, right? So you can add in other innovative factors. And with that, I'll pass it on.
Okay, so I'll try to make some brief comments so we have time for questions, because this is most important. So just briefly, I'm chemical engineer by training. I changed 3 institutions, my home department, which is overseas, and then 12 years in Boston, MIT, and now 14 years at Columbia University. My area is tissue engineering. We basically work in two different directions. One is regenerative medicine, and the other are so-called organs on a chip, essentially modeling of diseases and testing of drugs. So everything I say is pretty much around this area. Being a chemical engineer and then moving into the field that actually pretty much emerged at the time when after I graduated, made me change fields. My first funding was from NSF when I was a graduate student, and this was like a known quantity for me. When I moved to Boston and tissue engineering showed up, I just discovered this is what I really, really, really want to do, because I always liked medicine, and I didn't know what I want to do. Unlike many other people, I was pretty much lost at that time about like field of research. And then when I saw it, it's like a beauty, you know, you see something and you know this is it. My first money for doing tissue engineering research actually came from NASA. This was much easier money at that time. They were putting a ton of money into a new field than NIH money. So I was practicing doing something easier for something that will be harder. And this is one thing that's really good. This is what I always tell my students. So you go with K before R grant. So you need to go stepwise. I mean, making a really big leap is sometimes possible, but it's in most cases very, very difficult. Another thing, just from experience, if you're going into something new, and we always do, and all the time, because this is the nature of the field, it's easier to break ice through an RFA, which means like a call for proposals of specific kind. For example, NABIB is going into cancer research, or vice versa, like Cancer Institute is calling people for new technologies. This is a much easier path because typically they are more brave, they are more open to new initiatives, and the review panels are usually structured in a way that they're also open to fresh approaches and ideas. This is at least my experience. So when we started to go into some of the very new areas where we were pretty much nobodies at that time, then you open door through RFA, and then later you get R01, which is really the most difficult thing to get at NIH. So this is one thing. The other, again, like most people here are very, very young, and the order of steps is extremely important. Writing proposal is not the first thing that you get when you set up your lab. I mean, you really need to get data, get the paper out, establish yourself to some extent, and then go and submit proposal, because NIH does fund great ideas and great plans, but at the same time they fund people. Even if you have very good proposal, it is unlikely that it will be funded if there is a very big gap between your last publication that was under supervision of your mentor and your publication from your lab. I forgot to mention, this is also a little bit of experience. I served extensively on NIH study sections panels now. Actually, I work for Bruce on his council, but you do get to see the other side. I mean, as David mentioned, like sitting on a study section or review panel really helps you a lot. What else? For the proposal, when you get the review, you really take it seriously, and you particularly seriously take a comment that is recurring. Like 2 reviewers are telling you the same thing. Don't question that. This is really important. So you learn everything you can from your reviews. It is important there are all these different scoring criteria. You know, they score impact, innovation, significance, research plan, etc. In most cases, if you get a really bad score on innovation and significance, it's a good idea to step back and rethink what you're proposing, because these are deficiencies that are very difficult to fix. If they slam you on your research design, don't worry. I mean, you just follow comments and you fix it. But it doesn't mean your proposal is bad, but maybe you didn't convey the message the way you should, but these are the red flags, like bad scores on innovation and bad score on significance tells you, okay, this is not necessarily novel, and we are not sure that this is important. And the only other thing I would like to mention is, like with everything in life, like you're running a lab, you're doing whatever you're doing, get all help you can when you are preparing proposals, seriously. Like, you consult with people. We are running at Columbia workshops, like sessions on how to write specific grants. We review each other grants. So go learn from people how to structure the grant. Give it to read to your colleagues. And most helpful comments are from those that are slightly outside your area, because your reviewers will not necessarily be experts in what you know, they're knowledgeable. But like, go out and ask people, is it really clear? Do you see what I was planning to say? So just this, like a help with the reading, evaluating honestly, this is important. The other kind of help that's very important is reviewers will look into your ability to carry out the research. Very often, in particular in biomedical engineering, you need expertise in other areas. You need someone in surgery or cancer or stem cell biology. Get these people aboard, but be careful about their roles. You do need to keep leadership on your grant. You know, you don't do MPI with another very well-established person. I mean, this will not do very well for you. But just get them sometimes as co-investigators if they're really going to help you a lot. And in other cases, you need the research, you need something. Make sure that you get all these letters that document your ability to conduct the studies. I think this is pretty much it. I mean, everyone has a slightly different experience, but I mean, these are some of the things that I think at least I learned on different types of grants, different situations, and I still follow these rules. I still give my proposals others to read. I still ask my colleagues, can you please give me a letter so that I can work with you? So, I mean, some of these things really don't change with age, but I think it's most critical for your first proposal that you think carefully about it, and your first R01, it's much easier to get it when you're young than more senior, but it's important because this is like your identifier, you know, like you really declare to the world what you're going to do as a scientist. So it's very, very important what you propose, and it's very important that you build good reputation with reviewers, even if they reject you sometimes, you know, which way they still reject us, so don't worry, I mean, it happens.
Thank you. So I guess we'll open to questions right now. And one thing I failed to mention is that we had passed along blank cards for those who don't want to voice their questions but want to just pass them along. And is Michelle Chapa in the room? Okay, so maybe we'll just come around, collect them at the end of each row, but feel free to walk up to the microphones and ask your questions.
I don't want to co-opt the young investigators because despite my looks, I'm a really old investigator. But so I want to ask a more high-level question. So I'm trained as a physician and engineer, chemical engineer at Columbia. So I appreciate everything NIH has done over the last few decades to bridge the gap between clinicians and engineering. But I'm also a public health professional. And I think over the years, I haven't seen the same attempt to bridge the gap between, I think many public health problems can be solved by engineers, but there's less of a connection between the engineers and public health professionals. I'd like to hear, Bruce, your opinion, but everybody on the panel on that.
No, I think that's, first, it's a very astute observation. It's pretty obvious that we haven't been as engaged in that from my experience having just arrived at the NIH. I haven't really seen that. So I've actually been trying to socialize that concept with my colleagues who were really surprised to hear that engineering can potentially be used to solve some of these great challenges. And so I'm hoping that, I guess we don't know for sure, but next year we might be able to have more awards in that area. That's a way to get some things started. You know, the way that some of this works is that institute directors interact with each other and bring these problems up and say, you know, have you thought about that? So I've absolutely, I think it's an enormous opportunity for our field. I agree completely. And so we all kind of have to parallelize that message and get that out and talk to our colleagues on the academic and the government side to help raise the visibility. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
If I may just add something, Columbia is very engaged in like putting together public health also with others, and actually avenue that we found is particularly fruitful for making it happen is personalized medicine or individualized or diversity that NIH is very much promoting, like healthcare that's really tailored to the patient. And this is where public health plays an enormously big role, because this is the real connector between the care that may be provided to people and the actual people, and the other way around. I mean, this is how we learn about what may be really necessary at a certain time. It's very early, it's the beginning, but actually this idea got a lot of traction between our community.
I have a technical question. So if some ESI uses the R21 Trailblazer mechanism, is the ESI still eligible for R1 or R35 as a ESI?
Yeah, it's the larger grants, like an R1, that would remove your ESI qualification. So you'd be fine with an R21.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I have a question about what Gordana just mentioned, that you may want to consider publishing first when you start your lab. But what about, for example, the R21 that doesn't want any preliminary data, but you think you have, right? So I basically, like, if I get lucky and I start my lab next year, when can I submit a grant? Because I probably will need a year or two to write a paper myself. Thanks.
So I don't think they're totally mutually exclusive. So it's, you know, it takes a while to produce those papers. I think the R21 Trailblazer and the reshifting to the original intent of the R21s is designed to help you, not give you more of a headache. So, you know, go and put your concepts together. It's a 6-page proposal and a relatively low barrier. Everybody got their positions because they had great ideas. So leverage off of those great ideas that your university's hired you for and craft them into proposals early and often. The Trailblazer is a very special mechanism because it's really designed to capture you at that stage before you're getting those papers out. But certainly, you know, don't stop working on the papers. And it's all a matter of sort of matching where you are with your lab and your career with those funding opportunities.
I think I just say, you know, so if you're junior faculty, like, what's the priority? Well, the priority is to do everything now, right? Yeah, I guess if you ask different experts, you get different opinions, right? So I would say, to some extent, with grant proposals, apply early and often, right? Because if you're going to a particular study section, you'll start to get the temperature of that study section, get a feel what they think of you, what are you not writing that they want to see, and this type of stuff. But I would say that, like, if you haven't got the proposal right, if you haven't got it ready, if it's like, you know, you need a couple more days before the deadline to get it really tight and get rid of all the typos, it's almost better not submit it than to submit it and get a reputation with the study section that what you do is kind of sloppy, right? And I really agree that with Gordana, that you want to be trying to get like your first senior author papers out like as soon as possible. So it doesn't, I mean, to me, it doesn't necessarily have to be all that fancy of a publication. It doesn't have to be that Nature Medicine or whatever. Like you're publishing in, you know, the Annals of Biomedical Engineering, a bit less competitive, right? But that you are able to take your startup and convert that and your environment into publications is like a really good marker.
Maybe just an enhancement on that. Remember, so these mechanisms are designed to be able to provide people who are at different stages different opportunities. So statistically, you actually stand a pretty good chance with an R01, let's say at NIBIB, where the pay line may be as high as 24th percentile if you are, we don't know what's going to be next year, but if you have some papers out, that may be a better, that's something to aim for, and innovation and significance and all those other components. So Trailblazer is really designed to be an early stage type of mechanism before you do get these things established.
Good afternoon. I just had a quick question on this whole idea of technology development. As a physical scientist, one thing that strikes me is that there's when you say technology development, there's a lot in NIH with these ohms, that is nucleome, genome, of course, and all the other ohms. Now, the issue I see is that many of these ohms are based on sort of very well-established technology platforms, which is not a criticism at all. I understand that those are needed. But then sort of it sucks the oxygen out of those other technologies where you're still, you've shown the physical possibility, but you've not shown the clinical or the biophysical complexity of that physical mechanism that you're measuring. And the reason I say this is because then there's a mismatch as where you would put it. You would put it maybe in an R21, but then you have 6 pages. In that 6 pages, you may have some paper, but it's not on something that's clinical sample, et cetera, So it seems to me from the outside as a physical scientist that this sort of game is made for those who can capitalize on these ohms, and sort of with existing technologies. I could be wrong, so I apologize if I'm misinterpreting it. But I just wanted to get your opinion on how to navigate through this.
As a person who has been developing, like my first NIH grant was for turning on and off a laser 1 billion times a second. So that wasn't even an ohm. But you have to be able to link it to something that you can see down the road as going to be potentially impactful in human health. You don't have to be solving that problem. So for sure, across the NIH, for the most part, other institutes are not supporting that fundamental, and one way to characterize this is they're a driving biological hypothesis. So NIBIB supports research in engineering and physical science without a driving biological hypothesis. You can come in with a great, innovative, significant, hopefully, idea without that fundamental underlying hypothesis of how this is going to change biology and how you're going to prove that. But at the same time, you still need to connect the dots. So you have to say why this is important and where could it go? How can you envision this as an enabling technology for the future? And you have to make a very persuasive argument in that regard. Otherwise, if it's really just fundamental technology development without a clear connection to biomedical problems, then there are other agencies that are really better suited, that are, it's much more compatible with their mission. So it is a tricky area to navigate for sure, but unambiguously, the NIBIB supports non-hypothesis-based technology development. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be linking it to some vision of where it can potentially go. So you still need to do that. Having mentors are extremely important. So talking to colleagues in engineering and physical science who've walked that tightrope, managed that narrow line and been able to get into the NIH community with those types of ideas, that's also really, really important.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I just want to say another way to package this recommendation is it is a much better sell. It is more easily adopted if you really show the goal. So like bedside to bench to bedside. So you start from clinical needs, and then you develop or modify your technology to meet this clinical need. But then you also envision, like, if I'm successful, if this development is successful, this is how we will improve the standard of care or something. Like, this purpose is unbelievably important. Otherwise, people just don't understand. I mean, you may have great technology. Yeah, this is really cool, but so what? I think just start from something that people being also scientists and reviewers can identify with and understand why this is important is much better start for a proposal. And for research in general, not only, I mean, proposals are not, money is necessary, obviously, but I mean, it's all about the science, about the things that you will be doing. So like the way of thinking from the end goal to what needs to be done is usually more rationalized than the other way around.
Yeah, so my take on this, being someone who does research that is so untrendy that I think, so my focus is mainly on X-ray contrast agents. If you look at NIH Reporter, the only person in the USA is funded by the NIH to do that is me, so it's that untrendy, right? So yeah, you see all these like RFAs for immunotherapy and different things, but in addition to the RFAs, there are parent R01s and parent R21s, where like whatever your technology is, you can apply to those, and that's what I have typically done using those grant mechanisms. So that's open to whatever your technology is. It doesn't have to fit into one of these specific technology types. Thank you.
Just one more point, if I could give an NCI perspective. So we're definitely an organization that has a lot of those OMs, from the Cancer Genome Atlas to many other initiatives like that. And we've recognized, and for the past 20 years have recognized the need to support some of this early stage technology development. So we do have that IMAT program I mentioned earlier, where it's not hypothesis driven, just like NIBIB. You're coming in at an early stage, you may not even know that your technology works, trying to support some type of new development. So granted, we're not all focused on that, but there are some opportunities to come in and have a cancer application with new technology.
And the last thing I would add is this is a good time, a good opportunity to talk to program directors, because they know, they understand exactly how it will match, they understand the study sections, they understand the other grants that are funded. So work your ideas through with your colleagues at the NIH, treat them as partners, and they're enthusiastic. They want to see new stuff get funded. They want to see new technologies come in.
Those are great ideas. Thanks a lot for doing this. So my question is slightly different. Having, like David mentioned, these are, the needle moves up and down the measurement. And having sat on both sides of the table, and 8 to 10 percentile being really awful funding rate, and then you fall at the 12, 16, 17, it really hurts, right? And sitting at the reviewer, you know that the 17 could have as well been at 12 had there been one small minor change or whatever, right? So what we do, we come back and try to write a better grant. So the question I have for you is, as investigators or as faculty, can we think about what could we do to move that 14 to a 20 or a 25? What can we do for advocacy? Or I do not know if the right forum to ask. Is it something we can think about? Because instead, every time I get hit, all I do is I can come back and try to write a better proposal. Then 2 years later, the funding gets even harder. And where is the cycle going to end? So is there something we could do from the supply side as a community? That's something we often don't think about. Thank you.
I mean, I agree it's a problem, right? So like there's the funding dollars, but what creates the funding, the pay line is the denominator, right? Like, so how many investigators are applying? So if you want to decrease that, I mean, I don't know, tell your dean not to build a new building, something like that, like try and persuade your older colleagues it's a good time to quit, I don't know.
Well, the pay lines are better now, and we hope they'll stabilize and continue to go up. In theory, the whole center, the review system is healthy and robust, with the best stuff going forward when, many people sort of point to pay lines at around 30th percentile as a target where they should be. Various analyses have pointed to that. And I'm looking at my colleague David George, who has a lot of experience in the Center for Scientific Review. So maybe, Dave, would you like to comment a little on that question? Our question about I guess, stretching out the number, or
It
maybe
sounds like that's a resource question for an IC director, which, because we
No,
work with
it
the
is-
executive branch, we want to be careful about addressing.
No, it is.
We heard about the denominator, so.
No, it is probably a IC question. But then the point is that we all know that some grants are bad. I mean, they should never get funded. But then we also, when we come out of the review, every time, NSF, NIH, every time I come out of it, I know that I feel bad for that, that between 50 and 25, or if you go by the 1, 2, 3 scale, there would have been a minor error in the 2 or 3, and they know that if you give the money, they are going to fix it anyways. When they start running the experiment, they will do that control, they will do it, and it's going to be great science, right? So which means that it's probably in the 25 or 30 percentile is probably a good mark to hit it, and those are that's healthy science. And so my point is that I'm arguing from the other side. So what tomorrow, it's a resource question, if 8 percentile becomes 6 or 5, what do? We continue fighting? I mean, where is this going? I mean, what can we do to increase the resource, even in terms of advocacy? I mean, that is something we don't think about at all, and I think it's really time as a group, as faculty, we start thinking about those too.
Right, well, Bruce has been addressing that in the sense that we want to show our value to the people of the United States and the elected officials of the United States, that we contribute and we make a difference, and that's the top part, the dollar part, and then the bottom is the applications coming in, but we don't want those to go down, we want those to keep coming in. On a more local level too, it's not always just a percentile. I know I can't speak for NCI, and we have a colleague here from NCI. The NIBIB reaches out beyond the pay line, and some institutes do. So there are opportunities that we don't rigidly pay, for example, to 8 or 9%. I don't want to speak for NCI, but there is opportunities to look out beyond there and see maybe there was that one little thing that the program director might be able to say, yeah, that's not a big deal. I might be willing to reach out and fund this one. So having the communication with the program director may help you on those borderline kind of areas. So, excuse me, Bruce.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we're not talking about the culture of review and more talking about the culture of ensuring that our community, with great ideas, nobody is shut out. So you have a lot of really dedicated people throughout the NIH who are committed to that. A trick is matching your grant to the right home. There is some flexibility. It's not the same as NSF or DoD, but we have a program where we're able to reach beyond our actual published pay line and bring in important grants. We look very carefully at the language in the summary statements. And if you're persistent, as David pointed out, and your ideas are significant and innovative, if you continue to socialize them amongst your colleagues at the NIH, you will, there's no guarantee behind this, but the likelihood of being funded with your advocacy is going up. And there's a strong commitment by our community to bring talented investigators into the NIH. And then we want you to sort of illustrate the value of what you're doing by giving us materials and resources that we can then use to highlight. People have lots of stuff on websites. Our website is read by members of Congress. So we just recently went to Congress to testify before an appropriations committee. And before that, we were getting questions, pre-questions, from staffers that came from our website where they wanted to know about various grant highlights and various papers that were published by all of you. So this is extremely important. The Congress is quite sensitive to it. Do good work and stick with it. And that's my positive message.
Yeah, we have a few questions that were handed out. So the first one is, if your research spans 2 different fields, how should you choose which funding mechanism is best to pursue?
You mean like, say, engineering and medicine? I guess that it was written. Okay. Some of my proposals I submitted to lots of different funders, right? So proposal that eventually was funded by the NCI. I also submitted to the Komen Foundation. I submitted to the DoD, breast cancer. I submitted as pilot grants, things like this. We actually got a little NSF graduate student fellowship, it's like there was some guy who was jailed in Philadelphia who was a bank robber, and they asked him why he robbed banks, and he said that's where the money is. So I would apply wherever there's money that you conceivably think you can get it.
And one point on that, I think over the last, 10 years or more, it's become quite common to have engineering approaches incorporated into your proposal. So if it is a engineering and biology combination, I think that's getting more common that there's going to be an engineering reviewer on their panel, and this is something that people are getting more used to seeing. So you may be able to go to just a standard R01 study section and may not need something targeted that has that engineering component or addresses the two fields that you're looking to apply towards.
And it really relates back to this last question. I mean, every institute has a kind of identity and something that may be a cultural center. So at the NIBIB, our center is to really support enabling technologies that could have an impact in many, many different areas. You may have a demonstration of your technology in cancer or in heart disease, and that may be kind of the litmus test for its performance. But by and large, the grants that are funded by NIBIB could go in multiple directions. When you're sinking your teeth into a cancer problem, you probably will not get funded by the NIBIB. I mean, it's not impossible. But if you're really digging into a serious cancer problem, then you'll go to the cancer community. Now, if you're truly split in between, you need to talk to the program people. And it's not unheard of for program people to say, like NCI would say, we love this grant, but we typically don't take such risks. We like technologies to have been demonstrated first. And NIBIB says, this is the right level of risk for the technology. We feel comfortable with that. Maybe we'll split fund something. So that does happen as well. And it is good. You should be pushing the envelope of what's possible. So that's what our community should be doing. And then you need to toss it back into our court and give us opportunities to figure out how to get creative, important stuff funded.
And just talk to our program directors, and maybe that's maybe that IC that you contacted isn't the right one, but they're in contact with the colleagues at the other ICs. They will pass your ideas along, find the best match, and find the best IC and best mechanism for you to. On a related topic, I have a quick question. If you find yourself not hearing back from PMs, I suppose these are program managers, what is your best bet as a young faculty? How would you recommend finding the right study section? Okay, so let's start with the first one. Do you want to field that?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you sometimes don't get a response. I know there are some of us that have just tremendous email volume and do have a hard time keeping up on all of it. So definitely keep trying, and feel free to reach out to someone else. Reach out to one of their colleagues, and you can let them know that you weren't able to get in touch with them. I feel confident that within the NIH or within the institute that you're working at, you'll be able to get in touch with someone else that can help you. So if it is someone at NCI that you're trying to contact, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to try to redirect you. And I think a lot of program directors feel the same way.
Exactly. Yeah, so the second one is,
Yeah.
and do you want to add something?
No.
Okay, so the second question is, how would you recommend finding the right study section? You mentioned that a little bit. But again, definitely talking to your program director is one way of getting input as to this study section. You can also contact the SRO if you have a little bit of idea where it might fall. You can contact the SRO and say, is this something relevant to your program for your study section? And also, Michelle mentioned that the reporter has really nice natural language processing right now. They will go through your abstract and give you suggestions of study sections. There's one question about, do you have any funding opportunities for international doctoral students? Because I saw the eligibility is US citizens and permanent residents on most slides, which is true. So the only one that is currently open to international students is the K99R00. And for that, the only criteria is that you have a visa that allows you to work throughout the K99 portion. And when you come to the R00, then you will be asked to show proof that you have enough visa status to complete the R00 portion.
But maybe just to add, I mean, R01s, for example, are open to international investigators. You know, we have them as part of the grants, and then international students are also working on them. What you said is about fellowships. There are different ways how to get in. Like if your PI, your laboratory is part of an R01, which is based in the United States, then you can also be part of it. This is a big limitation. We're always super sorry that we cannot be open just to merit. But again, I mean, people are smart and getting around some of these limitations in a different way.
Or look to other funders. So, for example, the American Heart Association is open to anyone of any nationality. You just have to have a visa at the time when you apply.
Okay, so one question about funding opportunities in device/biochips. So off the top of my head, I don't know any specific program announcement for that, but all of the mechanisms that we talked about are open to unsolicited applications, so you can always apply to whichever program that your stage of the ideas is relevant to. And again, the best bet is to contact your program director and discuss. So let's see. You mentioned the importance of significance and innovation scores. I think this is for you. I have twice now received a proposal back where 2 reviewers give me a 1 or a 2 in both, and one will give 6 or a 7. This discrepancy is confusing. Who should I be contacting to understand, CSR or program director?
I think it was your question, right? It's very often, more often than we think, just a matter of communication. So if this happens, then this randomness, I think the most likely reason is that you just didn't make yourself clear. So someone who is very close to your area, like had better feeling about what you're doing, but then you did not reach with a clear message outside. I mean, I would just rethink how, and also look, they don't just say 5, they say why. So look carefully into this and see if this is something that you can fix and make yourself more clear next time.
If they give the same reasons for the 1 and the 5, then you're in trouble.
Confusing. Then call, yeah.
Because sometimes you'll see that
yeah,
too.
Yeah, but then there is always someone to talk to who can give you some additional advice, but I would just start from summary statement and try to, you know, figure out why you had this kind of response. It happens.
I mean, I think it can also just be the wobbly needle. So I've served on a study section which was more translational, and to them, the proposals were really innovative. And to me, they were not, right? So, I mean, it can just depend on who you're getting. So again, it's the kind of like, you know, if you're facing like a 90% chance basically that it doesn't get funded, you just gotta like keep doing submissions, and like one day, like that proposal or like another proposal, like everyone's going to agree about the innovation. It's all going to be once, right?
That's after those other 2 rotate off.
I just think what's most frustrating when I will get lots of 1 and 2s and then lots of, like from 2 people and then lots of 6s.
So
Do you have a faculty mentor on campus that like a senior? Because those are really important. Actually, you should have a good one. If you don't have one that's, you know, really dedicated to you, then you find another, and then for sure contact it's always assigned to a program person. So contact that program person. Hopefully that person has the insight and the intuition to help interpret some of that, because most of the program people have seen that before, even though it sounds weird to you. And so they'll be able, like they've done some modeling of these things and have figured out, oh, that study section, now I understand. You know, it could be an answer like that.
also, most program directors will attend the study sections and have notes on how the discussion went. And maybe one point that the reviewers was concerned about didn't get expressed as clearly in the summary statement, and the program director may have some input to add and help you out. I think have extended all the questions and gone a little bit over time. Thanks everybody for staying around. Thank you very much for our panel, for your input and participation. Thank you very much to you for your insightful questions.